And you are deeply mistaken, dear wife. It's cheating if I don't accept it, and I don't accept you taking another man to bed. I assume your new man is having the same conversation with his wife, she stammered again. I don't know." Now she was looking at her shoes. I snorted, chugged a double Kraken Coke, and turned to look at Louise. Her face was a beautiful mask of emotion. He's probably lying about not being home and being impossible to contact. I changed tack. "Has he kissed you yet?" asked Louise. "It's a simple question. Has Roger felt worthy?" "Yes." "Well, that says it all, doesn't it?" I tried to contain my anger.
Friday was a tough day at work due to a machine breakdown at the factory. I spent most of the day troubleshooting hardware and software issues with the engineering team, which left us all drained. Running my printing company for the past 12 years in northern Sydney has always been demanding. As I pulled into the garage that evening, exhausted, I couldn't wait for the day to end. Managing a print shop that caters to commercial and custom orders is consistently challenging. At home, I felt frustrated by my wife Louise's recent lack of affection. We've been together for over 15 years, and I thrive on physical affection, whether it's a simple touch or intimate moments. However, Louise has been distant and moody lately, despite her preference for quality time and attention. Balancing my roles as a husband and business owner becomes even more difficult when faced with rejection from my wife. Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Cameron, a 42-year-old with 2 daughters. Our eldest, Carrie, takes after her mother in looks and is determined and intelligent. Currently in her 3rd year of university studying engineering, she aspires to join me in designing new printing presses upon graduation. Yes, it might seem unusual for an 18-year-old to be so advanced in her studies, but Carrie's brilliance is truly remarkable. You will also notice that I said that Louise and I have only been married for 15 years. This is due to the birth of our second daughter, Sarah. We were happily married to Carrie, but got married when we found out we were pregnant with Sarah. Sarah is our hippie baby, to say the least. She is adrift, doesn't have strong opinions on many things, and usually takes the path of least resistance. She is just as smart as her sister, but prefers not to put herself into practice. In her 15 years, she is a social butterfly, spending most of her life with friends or glued to her phone chatting on Discord. Both of our girls went away for the weekend. Sarah was staying with friends and Carrie was out with her boyfriend, Robbie. I expected them both to return home sometime on Sunday afternoon, leaving Louise and me alone. I sat there reflecting on the past week and starting to push work out of my mind. With the girls out of the house, maybe Louise and I could work out some of our recent problems with a couple of drinks and a little bit of talk. I got out of my truck, a 2-year-old Ford Ranger, grabbed my bag, and made my way to the kitchen. Louise wasn't around, so I grabbed a glass, poured myself a Kraken and Coke, my favorite drink, and turned on some mellow tunes. Getting comfortable, I stared at the walls, trying to mentally let the day go. The broken machine seemed to be working again, but the lost revenue would cost us at least $10,000, and if we couldn't get it fixed properly next week, more. It was a good chunk of the paycheck for my staff in the Sydney market. Breaking away from my internal dialogue, I heard movement and the click of heels. My wife, Louise, walked into the room, and my breath caught. Louise is about 3 months older than me. After giving birth to 2 children and reaching her 40s, she had put on a little weight, but she went to the gym regularly and ate right, so she kept her curves in all the right places. She was dressed up, ready to go out into the world. Her purse was almost empty when she set it on the table and looked at me. "You look good, my love," I said, and she smiled at me. I sighed, taking a sip of my drink. "Sorry, Lou, it's been a rough day, and I just don't have the energy to go out to dinner tonight," I apologized, looking her over from head to toe. She smiled at me again, but this time there was no love in her eyes. Something switched inside me, and I felt my day turn from unpleasant to downright shitty. "It's okay, Cam," she said in a slightly shaky tone. "I didn't plan on you coming with me." I looked at her. In all our years, we very rarely went out separately, and even when she occasionally went out with her girlfriends, she never dressed like it was a date. You weren't? I questioned. I took a big sip of my drink. Then why are you dressed like we're going on an unusual date? For a moment, Louise looked unsure of herself. Cameron, she lowered her gaze to herself and stopped. Are you breaking up with me? I asked. Louise was taken aback. No, of course not, Cam. She tried to reach out her hand, but I pulled away and laughed bitterly. Now you're going to tell me that we had nothing to do with this, that you have to do this on your own. You're going to tell me that you deserve this after raising 2 kids and dedicating yourself to our family. I raised an eyebrow, looking at my rapidly deflating wife. I looked at her huge bag on the table. Judging by your bag, you weren't planning on coming home tonight. It's nice to see after all these years you're leaving our marriage so easily, not caring one bit what it does to us. I threw those words at her, my voice taking on an accusing, argumentative tone. Cam, she stopped and looked at me. I didn't interrupt her this time. She sighed and said quietly, we both work so hard, and I know you do it for us, but I'm only going to be seeing Roger for a while. Roger? I mean, Roger Fortho at your job? Roger Fortho, I asked. For a while, my wife answered. Nothing but the panic in her eyes told me that I knew exactly who her lover was. This took her by surprise. She sighed again. Yes, Cam, that Roger. He's been so good to me these past few months since you haven't been here. I exploded. What? Said Louise, surprised at my sudden outburst. You heard me, Louise, I said. You're rationalizing your way into an affair. Sure, we work hard, but saying I wasn't here is, and you know it. You're the one who's distancing yourself. I've been trying to spend time with you for months now, but you've been keeping me away. At least now. I know why you just can't F***K with me. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping across the floor. Cameron, I'm not bitching at you, she stuttered. Tonight, I mean this weekend, we were supposed to have our first time, she said, embarrassed. So you'll be an even bigger if you cheat on me for not just one night, but the whole weekend. I glared at her and then turned and went into the kitchen for another drink. I was tired to the extreme after work, but I needed another Kraken. I was pouring a double when Louise stood in the kitchen doorway. She was angry and for the first time unashamed of her feelings. Cameron, I am not a... She started, but I cut her off. But unlike you and your first love, Rose, I have never been with another man in my entire life. Roger tells me that I'm not cheating on you because I'm telling you what's going on. It's only cheating if I'm hiding it. That's low, dragging Rose into this as a low blow, and you know it. I almost growled at her, but at least she had the decency to look away. And you are deeply mistaken, dear wife. It's cheating if I don't accept it, and I don't accept you taking another man to bed. I assume your new man is having the same conversation with his wife, she stammered again. I don't know. Now she was looking at her shoes. I snorted, chugged a double Kraken Coke, and turned to look at Louise. Her face was a beautiful mask of emotion. He's probably lying about not being home and being impossible to contact. I changed tack. Has he kissed you yet? Asked Louise. It's a simple question. Has Roger felt worthy? Yes, well that says it all, doesn't it? I tried to contain my anger. My wife has stopped paying attention to me, rejecting my attempts to get close to her while having more and more physical relations with another man. So I guess that's it, we're done, I said, walked out onto the back terrace, and slammed the back door so hard that the house shook. I sat down in a chair by our table on the back veranda, hyped up from a hard day's work. I wanted to come home to be with my wife, and now she was telling me she was betraying me. It must have been about 5 minutes before Louise appeared in the doorway. Louise came out trying a softer approach. Cam, I love you, but I need to do this. I've just felt so stuck for the last year. Roger's been very understanding about it, so it won't be long, you'll see. I continued to stare out into the yard without looking at her. No, Louise, you don't understand. It would have helped if you had turned to me. I was supposed to be your best friend, your partner, but you gave yourself to another man and robbed me of the opportunity to be there for you. And now I don't know if I'll ever be able to be near you again." She didn't move. "Cameron," she said softly, firmly, but with a note of trepidation. "You can't leave. Roger tells me that if you do, I'll take everything from you. I can take half your business. I'll get the house, the kids, and then it'll be easy for me to turn them against you." Her voice got stronger as she walked forward, putting her hand on my shoulder. I turned and looked at her in disgust, jerking my shoulder away from her touch. "Would you do that to someone you just professed your love for? You cheated on me, threatened me, and then believed you could get away with it?" I growled. "I wouldn't have wanted that," my wife answered me, "but Roger told me that in a court of law I'll always end up winning. You don't have much choice. I'm sure I'll work it out and get back to you. You'll be fine, you're stronger than me." For the second time that night, I stood up abruptly, but this time with hatred in my eyes. I looked at the woman I somehow still loved at that moment, but the hatred and anger I was feeling took over. "You selfish, unfaithful," I hissed. She took a step back. "You dare to profess your love for me, thinking that I have any intention of staying married to you from now on, and you tell me I have no choice? Well, screw you, Louise. You've shown me that I have no idea who you are. You're not the woman I married. It's like something alien has taken you over. The woman I loved would never say she would destroy me by using my children against me. So who the hell are you?" "Cam, She stuttered. I let the anger pass as suddenly as it had appeared, choosing the rational path for a moment to see if I could reason with her. "Louise, if you love me the way you say you do, then stop all of this right now. I don't know if we can save our marriage with what you just told me. You were intimate with another man. If you call it off now and we go to counseling, I promise you that I will try to understand what you've been through. I'll try to forgive you for your betrayal." "My betrayal," she whispered. I nodded. "Counseling," she whispered again. "Yes, Louise, counseling. You may not see it now, but our marriage is in its death throes from what you've just laid out. So call it off and let's get counseling right away. I'll call Rose now, and we can get her here tonight to help." Louise had already thrown Rose at me. She was right. Rose was my first love, but it wasn't meant to be, as we ended up in different places and falling in love with different people. But Rose and her husband, Toby, were very close friends to both of us. Until tonight, I never thought Louise could have used Rose and my story against me in an argument. Rose was also a therapist, and Toby had become one of my closest friends over the years. We successfully complemented each other. Of course, it helped that we looked at the world with similar views on everything. It also helped that our children grew up together. Robbie, Rose and Toby's son, and Carrie were as friendly as thieves from birth. They'd been dating as a couple since 5th grade. Had they been given a few more years, I know their relationship would have continued to grow with proper parenting. "No, Cam, I don't want Rose at the center of all this," she said defiantly. She sighed. "Look, Cam, I understand how angry you are. You may think I don't get it, but I do." I tried to correct her, but she held up her hand. "Let me finish. You may think I don't love you, but I do. You're right in that those threats were wrong. I shouldn't have done them. However, that doesn't make them any less true." I looked at the woman standing in front of me, wondering if the alien spawn that had afflicted her brain was multiplying. "I'll make you a deal. I know I hurt you, but Cameron, I'm going with Roger this weekend. I'll go to counseling when Roger and I are done. It may take a while, but if you feel counseling is so important to you, we'll go there when Roger and I are tired of each other." "What about the girls?" I asked. "What about them?" asked La. "How do we tell them we're breaking up?" said I in an indifferent voice. "Cameron, we don't." She stopped talking suddenly, sighing. "We're not breaking up. I've already told you that sooner or later, Roger and I will go our separate ways. I'll be back. The girls won't be affected in any way. I'm talking nonsense again. I looked at her. What about me? While you're having fun with Roger, what about me? Where's the love for me? What do you mean? Louise hesitated again. Louise, I'm an affectionate guy, and you've pulled away from me. You haven't even kissed me in 2 weeks. I don't feel any love right now, Louise. So what am I supposed to do? She looked at me as if the thought had never crossed her mind. It hadn't occurred to her that I might need something, some attention, or care. I don't know, she lowered her eyes. Roger says I should be his for now. I exploded again, my emotions turning to frustration, rage, and sadness. To hell with Roger. Wait, that's what you're going to do? And spit on your husband, Cameron? That's not fair enough. I almost shouted at her, interrupting her. You're telling me that denying me, your husband, because of a piece of cheating on his own wife and denying me your body is goddamn fair? Louise took another step back. I picked up my glass, drained the contents, and threw it at the concrete wall our barbecue was leaned against. It shattered, and my soul shattered with it. I slumped back into the chair, my shoulders slumped, and I felt hot tears running down my cheeks. We didn't say anything for a few more minutes until a loud car horn sounded from the side of our driveway. I looked at Louise, seeing the indecision on her face for the first time. I turned away to look at the table, feeling like an empty husk. Just go away, I whispered. I don't know if she heard me or not, but when I turned around, my wife was gone. I don't think I moved from my seat for about half an hour. The confrontation with Louise had devastated me more than I realized, but I was roused by the phone in my pocket. It was my daughter Carrie calling. She had forgotten her bag of clothes for the weekend and wanted to let me know she was on her way home with Robbie to pick it up. Sorry, Dad, Mom's phone went to voicemail twice, so I thought I'd call you, she happily informed me, blabbering on about Robbie's boarding house that she was going to for the weekend. I snorted, trying to keep my cool. It's okay, sweetie. Your mom isn't home right now, but I'll make sure your bag is at the door and ready so you and Roger can get on your way, I reassured her. She didn't answer right away. Daddy, I sighed, yes, honey? I tried to sound normal. She wasn't buying it. Who's Roger? Carrie questioned me with a distinct tinge in her voice. I'm sorry, I meant Robbie. I'm sorry, Carrie, I meant Robbie. I couldn't believe I had made such a mistake, trying to backtrack. However, Carrie was a bright girl, and I was caught. What's going on? She paused when I didn't say anything. Normal, Dad, you're bothering me, she said. Nothing, Carrie. I'm just having a bad day. First, I had problems at work, then your mom and I had a fight, so I'm just emotional, I replied. I didn't want to lie, but I didn't want to tell my 18-year-old daughter the whole story either. Dad, stop skirting around the truth. You're trying to confuse me. What did Mom do? Her tone was accusatory. I tried to brush her off. It doesn't matter, honey. I'll be fine, you just caught me off guard. I'll get your bag ready for you. Don't let our problems ruin your weekend. Love you, Carrie. I quickly hung up, feeling like a creep trying to hide the truth from my daughter. I went into the house, splashed water on my face, then took Carrie's bag from her room and set it right in front of the garage door where she knew I would put it so she could grab it and leave. It wasn't the first time one of my girls had forgotten something. I grabbed the broom and was cleaning up the shards of glass when Carrie came screaming out the back door right at me. Are you okay, Daddy? She asked, looking at me through her eyebrows with a look of concern on her face. Louise had looked at me many times when she was worried about me, but it was a look I hadn't seen this evening when she was telling me about her plans to have fun with another man. I shrugged, trying to brush her off, and went back to sweeping the glass on the ground. Sure, honey, I put your bag in its usual place, I said monochromatically. I bent over and started sweeping the glass into the tray so I could toss it into the trash can while they watched. When I stood up, Robbie was standing in the doorway too, frowning. I hadn't managed to fool anyone. I pulled out a chair and lowered myself onto it. Carrie pulled the chair out and sat across from me, taking both of my hands and squeezing them. Dad, you're not okay. Mom called me back shortly after I talked to you. I heard she was in the car, and it sounded like someone else was with her. So what's going on? I looked at my daughter. I think she saw something broken in my eyes. The sparkle was gone. Damn, my daughter almost shouted, hurriedly handing Robbie back. What's the matter, baby? Asked Robbie, sensing his girlfriend was upset. He looked at me. I still didn't say anything. I felt old, depressed. My mother is cheating on my father, she said offhandedly. No, really? Both Carrie and Robbie looked at me. I nodded my head slowly. She gave me an ultimatum and then left with her lover some time before you called me, I admitted sullenly. They sat with me for the rest of the evening. Then, at some point, Rose and Toby showed up. Robbie showed up with Thai takeout food and a fresh bottle of wine. I slowly told all four of us about Louise's betrayal, her ultimatum, and everyone was shocked. Dad, Carrie asked, doesn't Mom remember the prenup you both made when Louise and I got married? When I was starting my printing business, my parents gave me a six-figure sum to help with the initial capital. Their lawyers drew up a prenuptial agreement which had several clauses in it. Specifically, if one of the spouses cheated, he or she would get only the clothes, 15% of the marital property, and the house, cars, and children would be left to the offended party. The business always remained out of Louise's sight in any separation or divorce. I shook my head. I don't think your mom didn't think at all, honey. Remember she told me it wasn't cheating if she told me about it? Carrie snorted. Daddy, cheating can't be excused whether she told you or not. It sounds like she's been cheating on you emotionally for months now. Sarah and I have noticed for weeks that something was wrong between you two. We just couldn't figure out what it was. I nodded, and then it hit me. Oh my God, Sarah. I need to talk to her. I need to let her know that everything is going to be okay. Carrie grabbed my hands again. Dad, please don't lie, it's not going to be okay. Mom killed something in you today, and I don't know if I can forgive her. She's still your mom, I replied. There was more whining in my tone than anything else. Mother or not, there's no reason for her to do what she did to you, she said sharply and then squeezed my hand again, softening. Sarah and I are going to be fine. I'll talk to her in the morning. She realized something was wrong too. We ate, and I found myself eating 3 servings of delicious Thai food despite my mood. However, after eating and talking to Carrie, Robbie, Rose, and Toby, I admittedly felt a lot better. Everyone, do you mind if I talk to Cameron for a bit? Asked Rose a little later in the evening when the topics had moved away from Louise, and I felt a little put off. The other 3 took that as a signal to head inside. Rose sat down in the chair across from me that Carrie had left behind. She seemed to see the look on my face, then looked over her shoulder toward the back door where the other 3 had gone, then back to me, smiling. You have an amazing daughter, Cameron, said Rose. I nodded, looking back at Rose. Rose was a beautiful red-haired woman. Like I said, she was my first love. We dated for a few years in high school until we went to different universities. Then she fell in love with Toby, and shortly after that, I met Louise and was infinitely in love with my wife until tonight. Rose and I were close despite or because of history, but neither of us would have ever considered betraying our spouse. The fact that our children were dating strengthened our family unity. Carrie and Robbie knew a little that Rose and I had dated when we were young, neither of us hid it. We also knew that now that they were both 18, Carrie and Robbie were sleeping together, but we knew how much they cared for each other and didn't stand in their way. Carrie confessed to Louise and me that the first time they slept together was on Robbie's 18th birthday. It was her birthday present to him. Rose tapped my leg with her foot, bringing me back to the present moment. How are you, Cam? Don't lie to me. I know you almost better than anyone else. I shook my head. I don't, Rose. I mean, I knew it was hard for us, but this. I gestured to the air. Then, more calmly, I continued, I still love her, Rose, but I hate what she did to me, to us. I hate it, and I want to scream, I want to cry, I want to hurt her and her boyfriend, but right now, I still love her. I said this with an agonizing scream. Rose nodded, now in psychiatrist mode. How can you handle it, Cam? She asked. I stared at her for a moment. Rose, cut the crap, I smirked sadly. It doesn't work on me. Besides, I've known you too long, I said. She smiled back, bringing me out of my reverie. But what can I do in response? I asked. Well, at the very least, break up, and more likely, get a divorce with all the terms of the prenuptial agreement honored. I begged her to stay. I told her we could get counseling, but what I got in return were threats that she would take everything from me and then turn my girls against me. Rose nodded. Cam, you're right, and I think you know I can't be your counselor in this matter. I'm too close to both of you, so tomorrow we'll try to find you someone to talk to, but both Toby and I will be there for you through all of this. You know that Toby and I think everything of you. I'm sure Robbie and Toby are trying to talk your daughter out of wanting to destroy her mother right now. I don't think we've seen Carrie this pissed off since Candy Taylor asked Robbie to the junior high dance. She laughed. I laughed back quietly. You're right. Thank you, Rose. I'm sorry about that. You don't deserve to be in the middle of this. She pulled away from me. Don't worry, Cam, we're here for you. Trust me, if you were the one who dumped Louise, we'd be doing the same for her. And talking about your destruction. I leaned back in my chair. Rose, I would never. Rose smiled at me. Relax, Cam. I know you wouldn't. That's why I wasn't shy about talking about it. You and Toby are two of the most loyal people I've ever met. And if you looked alike, I'd think you were brothers. Toby was relatively short, just over 5 feet tall, but he was stocky, muscular, with blonde hair and blue eyes. I have a mop of brown hair. Because of my job, I'm tall and trim but not in Toby's league. I think that's why I fell in love with him, she said it wistfully, sinking into memories for a moment. We both laughed. It was an old conversation that had long since ceased to be awkward, proving that Rose and I shared a deep friendship. For the next hour, we discussed my feelings, mostly sadness and betrayal mixed with rage and a sense of numbness that I couldn't explain, but Rose understood. Later, we walked into the house and found Robbie and Carrie snuggled up on the couch. Toby was sitting in one of the other Shea lounges, watching a movie. Hi, everyone, I greeted. Carrie was immediately beside me and gave me a hug. Are you okay, Daddy? She asked worriedly. I looked at Rose, and she smiled. No, honey, I'm not okay. But I'm so glad you're all here. It would be so much worse if you weren't, I replied. She gave me a hug. Dad, Robbie and I are going to stay here tonight. We don't want you to be alone, but Carrie, what about your weekend? I asked. Robbie brushed off my concerns. Cameron, he said, I can tell you right now that there's no place Carrie and I would rather be right now. We can do the weekend anytime. I already got the credit for the B&B while you were talking to your mom. So, we can reschedule it soon. But Carrie was right. In light of what happened, I think you need us here. I didn't argue, and we parted ways that evening. Rose and Toby said goodbye, promising to bring breakfast in the morning. I said goodnight to Carrie and Robbie, then showered and read in bed for a while to take my mind off things. We'll bring you coffee in the morning, Daddy. I know I won't get a good night's sleep tonight, so I can only guess how you're going to do, she told me. I smiled sadly, thanked her, gave her another hug, and kissed her forehead, then retired to my room. I took a shower, finally changed into my work clothes, went back to my bedroom. Inside, there were reminders of Louise everywhere. In the room, even on the bed, were things she hadn't put away, going into the weekend without me. I threw them on the floor or in the closet, intending to stuff them into boxes with the rest of her things tomorrow. I was lying in bed, on my iPad, reading one of the latest books in the Spellmonger series, a fantasy series I'd enjoyed following over the years, when my phone rang. For a moment, I thought it was Louise, but it was Toby, letting me know they were home and thinking of me. I thanked him by putting the thumbs up emoji. He replied that they would see us tomorrow around 9 a.m. I was about to put my phone down when a sudden thought hit me. I opened the Find My Phone app and sent a ping to Louise's phone. It sent a request for a location a couple of hours away in the Blue Mountains, and I sighed. I took a screenshot to prove that she was running after me. And that got me thinking about our security system. We had one of those Swan security systems that recorded audio and video with cameras placed throughout the house, leading to a hard drive in a closet. We had 8 cameras dotted around the house. The one in the backyard was set up to email Louise and me if they detected movement. However, all of the cameras kept a constant recording until the hard drive filled up, at which point the cameras began overriding the previous content. The disk stored up to a week's worth of content for all 8 cameras. So, I logged in and reviewed the footage from the back patio camera from tonight. Sure enough, the camera had captured footage of Louise and me discussing her infidelity when I went outside. I also checked the front camera and saw a large guy get out of a brand new BMW, greet Lou with a kiss, and then they jumped in the car and drove off. I now had an ironclad confession and a video of her leaving me to sleep with Roger Felth, as well as a ping from her phone proving she wasn't in my location. I pulled out my laptop, logged into Swan Security, exported the videos into an email along with instructions on how to start the divorce process. While I was agonizing over the wording for the lawyer and just attaching the videos to the email, the phone rang. It was Louise. She must have still been awake with her lover, having heard the Find My Phone signal. I switched the handset to voicemail. A moment later, I received a voicemail notification. I listened to it. Cameron, Roger, and I heard my phone beep. We're telling you now, don't do anything stupid. Sooner or later, we'll be done. We'll talk, and then you can do things my way. If you do otherwise than I tell you, Roger will destroy you, and I will take everything from you. I heard Louise's words. Roger giggling could be heard in the background. Yes, you little toady. Trust me, it's not forever, but if you ever blab to anyone, I will take a personal interest in taking you apart, piece by piece, until you lose everything. Your wife, your kids, your business, and let's not forget any respect you ever thought you'd have. When Louise and I are done, she'll come back to you. Just play ball, and everything will be fine. As they hung up the voicemail, I heard them both laugh. For a moment, I was stunned. I'd heard a lot of rudeness over the years, but this guy's disrespect and outright arrogance shifted the focus in me, and I decided it was time to destroy them, not myself. I redrafted the letter, indicating that not only did I want to serve Louise at her work with divorce papers as soon as possible, but I also wanted to file a lawsuit against Roger Fellworthy. I wanted them to hurt. I also wanted Louise and Roger to be sued for loss of income within my own business, for either encouraging the affair or being unaware of the wrongdoing that was causing me mental anguish, causing my own business to suffer. I knew that these claims were unlikely to be pursued. However, simply suing all parties, in addition to divorce and enforcement of the prenuptial agreement, would be a huge blow to the couple's arrogance. So, as I hit the submit button, I realized that I didn't have Roger's wife's information yet. But if I did, I would contact her and let her know what a cheater her husband was. I'd like to say that after sending the letter, I slept soundly, knowing I was taking action against the cheaters, but that would be a lie. I tossed and turned until the wee hours of the morning and even heard Carrie and Robbie get up before I closed my eyes. I listened. It sounded like Robbie was heading to his car to get the promised coffee. I put on my pants and shirt and headed for the kitchen. When I entered the room, Carrie saw me and hugged me tightly, asking if I had slept. I shook my head. Me neither, she replied. I tried, but I just couldn't. I just don't understand how Mom could do that to you, she complained. I mean to us, not just you. We talked about her university studies for a while longer, trying not to broach the subject until Robbie returned with 3 very welcome large cups of coffee. I sipped the glorious drink. I've always loved cappuccinos. The chocolate on top only enhanced the flavor of the coffee, dancing on my taste buds. Simultaneously, Carr and I sigh. Robbie laughed. You both exactly the same. He turned serious. So you haven't been sleeping either, have you? No, I was actually very busy texting with the company lawyer when I got a voicemail from Louise. After I made a Find My Phone request, I spent the next 10 minutes explaining how I had put together a packet of documents to start divorce proceedings with Roger and their place of work. After playing the voicemail, Louise and Roger had left me. I could see Carrie trying to hold back tears as she listened to the message. That woman is not my mother, she said quietly, wiping her eyes with a coffee napkin. My mother would never be cold enough to insult my father or allow another man to humiliate her husband like that. Robbie and I were in complete agreement. It was about 10 o'clock in the morning when we started wondering where Rose and Toby were. They told us they would bring breakfast around 9 o'clock, so we started to worry. An hour later, Robbie tried calling first his mom, then his dad. When he couldn't get through, I tried that too. I called Mom's house, the cafe where we always went for breakfast, and the owner, Josie, an elderly lady in her 60s whom we all knew by now, confirmed that Rose and Toby had picked up breakfast around 8:30 on their way to my place. As I hung up the phone, I was overcome with intense anxiety. I was packing my keys to go looking for them when Robbie's phone rang. He picked it up, and within a minute, he was lying on the floor with a pale face. I took the phone from him. Hello, this is Cameron Otter. I'm the father of Robbie's girlfriend. Who am I speaking to? Said I. Mr. Otter, this is Police Constable Colin Sharp. I want to tell Robert the sad news. His parents have been involved in a major accident, he said. I inhaled sharply, looking at Robbie lying on the ground, almost comatose. Carrie wrapped her arms around him, looking at me desperately. I am asked a question. Are Rose and Toby all right, Constable? There was a pause. Mr. Otter, I take it that Robert can't talk right now? I replied that he was. Mr. Otter, can you get Robert to give me verbal consent to speak to you on this matter? I managed to get Robbie to say yes. The officer paused, catching his breath. Around 8:45 this morning, the Giddings car collided with an out-of-control semi-trailer that had failed its brakes. As a result of the accident, their car was practically destroyed. I am very sorry to hear that Mrs. Giddings is currently in surgery. Unfortunately, Mr. Giddings did not survive. I think I turned just as pale as Robbie as I sank to the ground. Toby was dead, and Rose was in surgery. I cleared my throat. Which hospital? I asked. Helly, Carrie started talking about the hospital in a panic. I could see she was on the verge of tears too, realizing something serious had happened. I swallowed hard. Now was not the time to lose my temper. They are both in the North Shore Hospital. May I assume that you and Robert will be there soon? She asked. A note of sadness could be heard in her voice. She acted professional, but I could sense that the stranger was having a hard time. Yes, I mumbled, getting detailed information on where to go and what to say when we arrived. 5 minutes later, the 3 of us were out the door. Within half an hour, we were already outside the trauma unit of the hospital. The nurses were doing their best to reassure us. Questions about how Rose was doing, where Toby's body was, whether Rose would survive, and what was wrong with the other driver were asked constantly. Constable Sharp came in and introduced herself. We talked for the next 20 minutes. Robbie again allowed me to act as his representative, and she told me the whole story. As Rose and Toby were driving, an out-of-control, fully loaded truck had crashed into their car, leaving it in shreds. Toby took most of the impact on the driver's side, his side of the car almost merging with the passenger side. He died on the way to the hospital from multiple injuries, including a fractured skull and multiple puncture wounds to his torso and upper body. There were other injuries, but I won't recount them here as they are too graphic. Accidents like this are horrific. Rose was also in critical condition. She also had a small skull fracture, multiple lacerations, and 2 broken legs. However, the most serious problem for Rose was the loss of her left arm, as well as part of her left forearm. The surgical team worked diligently to stitch up the wound as well as repair several other puncture wounds. Rose also suffered severe blood loss due to the inability to stop the blood flow, but fortunately, if there is such a thing in accidents like this, her mangled arm was above her head when she was pulled out by emergency crews, so thankfully, she didn't bleed out. The rest of the day passed in conversations and phone calls. I have to hand it to Robbie. After the initial shock, he sat with me all day while we waited for news about Rose and started calling people. First, we called his grandparents, then Toby's brother in Brisbane. Then we called Rose's brother. When the Moose people arrived, Carrie and I had to help Robbie with the paperwork for his father's death. Carrie called Sarah, and within an hour, she was at the hospital hugging Robbie and crying with Carrie. After a while, she looked up at us. "Where's Mom?" she asked innocently. Carrie and I looked at each other. "She's not coming," Carrie said bitterly. Sarah looked at Carrie, then at me. "I take it this is Roger's doing," my youngest daughter asked grimly. To say that Carrie and I were shocked that day when everything that could go wrong went wrong was an understatement. "Sarah, are you telling me you know something about your mom and Roger?" I asked quietly. Sarah nodded her head solemnly. Fresh tears began to roll down her face. "A couple of weeks ago, I saw Mom bring in some new underwear, and I asked her if she bought it for you, Dad." I watched her shoulders slump. I had to pester her for a few days, but at one point, when she didn't tell me the underwear was for you, she took offense at me and then blabbed that it was for a date with some guy named Roger, saying you didn't have a chance to see him. "Sarah, why didn't you say anything?" There was an accusatory note in Carrie's tone. "I don't know," she looked at Carrie. "We were talking about Mom and Dad living apart lately. I didn't know what to do, and I stayed as far away from home as possible once I found out what I didn't want to know. I didn't want to run into Mom," she looked at me, "or with you." "Sorry, Dad." I hugged her. "It's okay, baby girl. I wish there was something I wanted you to say. I didn't know until last night, but it's okay." She started to cry. "I'm so sorry, Daddy. If I had said something, maybe Aunt Rose and Uncle Toby would have." She never finished the thought. Instead, she broke down. That night, we left only to shower and change. I brought Carrie and Sarah home. We cleaned up, then Carrie drove her car back to the hospital with Sarah, and I followed them. I think it was about 4 o'clock Sunday morning when Rose was brought in from surgery. She was all bruised and in critical condition, but alive. She will be in the ICU for at least a few days. They wanted her to recover and make sure there was no brain damage before taking any further steps. Even despite his grief, Robbie was gracious to the doctors and asked to meet the team of surgeons who labored for hours to save his mother's life. I have never been so proud of my daughter's boyfriend and sincerely hoped that one day I could call him my son-in-law. We spent the rest of the day at the hospital. I took home my laptop and phone chargers after receiving confirmation that the paperwork had been drawn up and was ready for delivery to Louise, Roger, and their place of employment on Monday morning. I was relieved to note that I had a damn good lawyer, better than Roger. I was willing to bet. I also contacted my duty managers at work to take over the workload for the week as we had a family tragedy and I needed time. I didn't bother telling them I had more than one emergency, but they knew their business and kept me on my toes. One piece of good news was that one of my support team members was able to fix the remaining problems on the car that broke down on Friday. Throughout Saturday afternoon, we started working with Robbie on planning Toby's funeral. Robbie left a message with their family lawyer for instructions. As long as Rose was doing well, he wouldn't be needed, but Robbie wanted to be prepared. We talked about the funeral for a few hours, and after lunch, we were joined by Edgewa, Rose's mom, an older woman in her 70s but still as witty as ever. She hugged her grandson and then gave me a big hug. Edgewa had always treated me like a son. She loved Toby but always spoke of me in joking tones as the one who left her daughter. She informed us that Camille, Toby's mom, would be coming to visit us at the end of the week as soon as she found someone to drive her from the retirement village since she couldn't drive. After lunch, we talked easily. Edgewa sat with us in the hospital waiting room as we had planned. I wondered if we would be moved on. However, when I asked the nurse if we needed to move, she shook her head no. That unfortunately happens more often than you expect, but as long as it's not too crowded, you can stay. We know the grief you're all going through right now, and I understand that you need to be near Mrs. Giddings while you wait for her to wake up. I smiled, thanking her for her answer. Time flew by as we all talked and reminisced. Louise was only mentioned in passing, and as soon as Carrie brought Edgewa up to speed about Louise, anytime no one was watching her, a grim frown would appear on her face. It was about 8 o'clock on Sunday evening when I answered the call on my cell phone without looking. All of our phones had been ringing off. The hook all day as news of Toby's death and Rose's injury spread. "Hey, this is Cameron," I said as I watched Robbie hug Carrie and look into each other's eyes with a smile. I watched as they exchanged the words "I love you" followed by a kiss. As they mourned each other, they fell even more in love. "That's no way to call your wife," I heard Louise scolding me on the phone. "I told you not to make waves or you'll regret it. Roger is fierce and will take you out if you say anything to anyone." "Where the hell are you, Cameron? You're supposed to be home when I get there." I don't know what had happened to Louise over the weekend, but if there was anything left in her of the insecurity or regret I'd seen on Friday night, they'd been taken away by the stoppy woman who was now on the phone with me. "Louise," I uttered, the contempt so evident in that single word. All the talking around stopped. Everyone looked at me at the same time. "It's me, you great grouch. Where are you, and where are the girls? If you tell them anything, I told you I'll turn them against you, so you better go home, or I'll make you sorry." I hung up the phone halfway through. I wasn't interested in threats. Tomorrow, Louise would find out that her neatly constructed narrative was falling apart. "I just got home," I shrugged. "We could hear her father," Sarah said quietly. "I don't know why you even picked up the phone. I spent several hours today talking one-on-one with my youngest daughter." She apologized over and over again for not saying anything, but after hearing the extent of her mother's deception, she was almost as angry at her as Carrie was. "Daddy, in the divorce, I'm going to live with you, okay?" said Sarah to me out of the blue as we talked earlier. "Of course, baby, of course," I said as I hugged her. Coming back to the present, I looked at a smiling Sarah. On instinct, I answered the phone without thinking. It just took me a moment to get my bearings. The next moment, my phone rang again, Louise's, of course. Over the next 10 minutes, she tried calling a dozen times, then she tried calling the girls. After half an hour, Carrie had had enough of it. "What?" she shouted into the receiver, picking it up. Louise reprimanded our oldest daughter for her tone. "Mom, stop it. I have absolutely no interest in talking to such a lying, cheating right now. I'm here with my family, including my sister and father. We're in mourning right now, and we don't need you interfering with our grief." I could hear Louise shouting a string of curses and swear words into the receiver that I didn't think she could ever put together, let alone say them to her daughter. The bottom line was that she thought Carrie was talking to her about the breakdown of the relationship between Louise and me, not about Toby's death and Rose's life hanging in the balance. I realized that Louise had no idea what had happened. Louise continued for another minute before Carrie interrupted her. "Mom, I have no intention of putting up with your yelling anymore. And before you start, yes, Dad told us everything too, so you should know. I have no interest in living in the same house with you. You're a mom, you had a man who loved you and children who adored you as a role model. Now you've traded your father for a mate who's likely to drop you like a hot potato, and you've lost the respect of both of your daughters." She paused. Obviously, her mother had spoken. "Yes, and Sarah and I," yes, Sarah told us what she knew. "My dad is good for forgiving her, and she hates you as much as Dad and I do. So pack your suitcase, Mom, because none of us want you around when we get home." She paused again, listening. No, Mom. I won't tell you where we are or when we get home. Why don't you call Roger and go to him? She paused falsely for half a second. What's that? You can't because he's gone home to his wife, who has no idea he's a low-life cheating bastard who's helped you destroy any respect for you in the family. Sorry, Mom, Elle started to reply. Sorry, Mom. I think they announced our flight. I'll talk to you later, and hung up. She looked at all of us staring at her, then pointed to her phone in her hand. Wrong number, Carrie said simply. Despite everything that was going on and the seriousness of the situation, everyone giggled, even the nurses at the nurses' station across from us. Edna went home for the night, promising she'd be back early in the morning. Meanwhile, Sarah and I were getting ready to leave for a few hours. Carrie and Robbie would stay longer, and Sarah and I would return around midnight and switch places, letting them go to sleep. Sarah and I were putting things in our bags when the trauma nurse came up to us. She's awake, she said excitedly. We all smiled, and everyone burst out laughing very nervously. We then asked about Rose's condition. She is being seen by a doctor right now. She is really out of it, but since she is conscious, you will all be able to see her for a little while. For the next hour, we took turns examining Rose. Well, that is what we could see. Almost every part of her was sheathed in something medical. There were wires coming out of almost every part of her. Her head was wrapped in bandages, but what was most disturbing was the sheathed stump of her left forearm. Hi, Petal, I said, using my nickname for Rose when we first met. I called her Petal, my Rose. If anyone but me called her that, she always got an earful. You gave us quite a scare, but I'm glad to see you're on the mend. She couldn't speak yet because of the breathing tube in her throat. Of course, she was still under the influence of the potent medication, but there was a question lingering in her eyes that I didn't want to answer. I shook my head, and she understood. A single tear rolled out of her left eye and quickly soaked into the bandage. I couldn't touch her, and so on for the rest of my visit. I sat with her and talked quietly about how proud I was of her, that she was my family, and we would all get better together. When I left the room, the nurse handed me a tissue. I had been crying, but I didn't even know it. I thanked her and went back down the hall. A half hour later, Sarah and I hugged Carrie and Robbie and headed home. Sarah and I were tired to the bone. We managed to sleep for about 3 hours before we headed back to the hospital to give Carrie and Robbie a break. Although now that Rose was awake, we were all somewhat relieved. We smiled as we drove, talking about the dream and how glad we were that Rose was awake. But then we both frowned as we pulled into our driveway. There was a strange BMW X5 parked in our driveway. We muttered at the same time. I saw that the front lights were on and drove past, making a U-turn and pulling over to the curb in front of our house. We saw the curtains move, but the door didn't open. Should we go in or just leave? Sarah asked. I shrugged and sighed. We should go in. Sorry, sweetie, but I don't think it would be safe for me to drive too long today without a break or caffeine, so I suggest we go in. You'll go to your room, close the door, and try to ignore what I'm sure will be an unpleasant conversation. Are you sure, Dad, that I can stay with you? I smiled. Sarah hated confrontation. That was one of the reasons she hadn't said anything to me, but the fact that she was willing to confront her mother with me spoke volumes about how much my 15-year-old daughter was upset with her mother. I pulled out my phone and pressed record. Sarah looked at me, doing the same thing with her phone. We both got out of the car and walked down the walkway to the front door. It was unlocked, and we walked right in. A lovely guy named Roger Flora, there he is, the little cockle. Back to apologize, and you're going to play ball before I ruin your damn life, he said coldly, with the arrogance of a man who got what he wanted despite no objections. Sarah walked into the room, causing Roger to flinch. Louise hesitated for a moment, her lover handing us a suit for verbal discrimination with a minor in the room. If you don't mind, Daddy, I'm too tired for this. I'm going to bed, and make sure you're up by 11:30 so we can get back. She walked past the stunned Roger and Louise, uttering only a hello to them and saying nothing else. As soon as the door closed behind Sarah, they pounced on me again. Louise told you not to say anything to your daughter, you bastard, said Roger, lunging at me with steam. I picked up the phone. Informing you that I'm recording this conversation. It has been recorded since we walked through the door and will be recorded until you leave, I said, looking at the two cheaters. Louise looked at me and turned pale. Roger turned a little pale too, looked at the phone in my hand, and then shrugged. Whatever, cuckoo, he smiled. Roger was an imposing man. He was taller than me and broader in the shoulders than I was. However, most of his body was fat, not muscle. In addition, he was balding, and jowls appeared on his chin. I'd say he was in his late 40s, probably early 50s. Honestly, I couldn't understand why Louise would want to date a man like him. I ignored Roger for a moment, looking directly at my wife Louise.